I'm recording this on September the 27th, and there was one story that came out of the Observer today, of the Wrestling Observer on this day, that completely captivated and enthralled the imagination of wrestling fans everywhere, to the point that it got really annoying really fast, but nonetheless, it is out there, and that is that AEW is tacking on injury time to Rey Fenix's contract, which would end up being almost an extra year, right? Tony Khan made Fenix and Penta significant offers to stay, but they would not sign a new deal. That's the gist of it. That's what's come out of the Observer today regarding that, right? And this, of course, set up an entire firestorm of fans entrenching themselves into their positions. The haters, the lovers, the fans, the non-fans. Everyone had to take a side here. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Well, I'm going to tell you. I'm going to give you the best opinion. Mine. My opinion is the best. Okay, so essentially, like it's Fenix, right? Fenix is the guy who got the extra time tacked on to, so he could potentially be there till next summer 2025. And Penta's contract is coming up real soon, right? Real soon. So he could just go into WWE and get the signature, right? But is WWE interested in Penta as a singles guy? I would argue no. Maybe not. The main question that is just like going over everyone's mind, that everyone is going crazy cuckoo about, is did TK do the right thing? Did Tony Khan do the right thing here? A lot of people are saying yes, and a lot of people are saying no. There's really only two ways to go about this. Let's say he lets them go when their contracts expired and he didn't tack on any extra time, right? That would be very good for the talent. Obviously, it's very, very friendly to workers' rights, essentially, right? But that could also send a horrible message to your locker room saying, yeah, WWE can come in here anytime and just grab whoever they want and hit the bricks, and there's no consequences. They could start chatting with you while you're still under my employ, and that wouldn't be a problem. That's one way of approaching it. The other situation is what he did, which is to tack on extra time, and then your message is clear. Locker room, fellas, ladies, you can't just go negotiate and set things up with WWE while you're working for me. Or if you do, there will be consequences. But that really does stink for the talent. Like it's not the best move on that front. Had it been 2 years ago, and I really believe this, had it been 18 months, 2 years ago, something tells me we could have had a different outcome. I think Tony Khan could have kicked around the idea of releasing them. But in this context, right now, where you remember there was a time he was a lot more mellow about WWE. You remember this? Where he was a lot more mellow, and he was like, look, if they want to talk, if they want to chat with us, and maybe, that's fine. And he had lent Brian Danielson for a video, right? He'd been very chill about a lot of stuff. But then since then, he's seen how WWE's trying to impede on him, not being very competitive, or at least being the Vince definition of competitive. He's been, he's mentioned recently about contract tampering, although we've talked about it, although maybe it's not exactly contract tampering. But, you know, he's been annoyed at WWE sticking its nose in his business. He outright said, you know, WWE's feeding false information out there and so on and so forth. I think that in this environment right now, in this environment right now, there was no way he was just going to let Fenix and Penta just head on out. I don't think there was any way, there was no way that he was going to let that happen. So, you know, I think it's fair to be annoyed at Tony. I think it's fair to be angry at Tony for it, you know, because a lot of people are saying, well, this is the kind of shit that WWE used to do, you know. Sure, absolutely. I think the contexts are very different, and I think, you know, to a degree, I think when WWE would pull this stuff off, let's go back and think of one of the, you know, I think one of the most egregious examples that is still in the mind of a lot of people. Let's say we think about Pac, right? When he had asked for his release and WWE said no and they benched him, right? There was no reason for WWE to latch onto him and say, no, you're not going anywhere. You're not leaving. Well, because there was no major national competition. You know, there was Impact TNA, but let's get real, right? There was no AEW at the time is the point. And what would Pac have done? Well, probably exactly what he did, right? Just pack up and head back to Dragon Gate for a bit. That's exactly what he did. And that has no implication on WWE's business whatsoever. It has no incident. They're just like completely different territories, completely different sets of fans, of mindsets. Like there was no reason, there was no true reason for them to hang on to Pac that long. And people who are trying to make that comparison, I think it's a bad comp. I think it's a terrible comp, in fact. Because in this circumstance here, you are in a talent war. You are angling for each other's top guys. So it's different. So I can understand where Tony's like, I'm not handing them these two dudes, especially since I might be handing them another guy like very, very soon. We're not doing that. And the frustration here, so while, okay, let's backtrack a bit. So while fans were furious at WWE for, shelving Pac and not letting him perform and wrestle, there was no reason for them to hold on to him. Like zero reason. In the slightest. There was no reason to hang on to Pac. So if anything, it's more egregious. In this case, well, Tony just doesn't want to hand deliver some guys to WWE. So I get it. He's protecting his business. He's protecting how he conducts business with his locker room, with his talent. I think it's fine. But it really does suck for Penta, not for Penta, for Rey Fenix. And I can get behind that. I can absolutely get behind people who are upset that Tony Khan is doing this and just let the guy go. It's hard to disagree with that. It's really, really difficult to disagree with that position. But maybe the Lucha Brothers could have handled this in a different way as well. They could have handled this a lot better. They just walked into these negotiations, without, fully considering consequences, I guess. They could have just, they just started talking about going to WWE and heading there and, and they thought they would be just free to do it. According to reports, AEW was the last to know, was the last to find out about their intentions, right? And some of you are mentioning it in the chat, and that's important to point out here, there's a lot of finger pointing that can go, that could be done towards Conan and his wonderful podcast. I didn't know if you've heard it. He's implied on it, on his podcast, that he helped convince Penta and Phoenix to jump to WWE, and that he may have done it. As payback for some slights or some perceived slights that Tony Khan did upon his person. You know, he's likely the guy who went around leaking news to Joey Votes that WWE is already producing masks and getting t-shirts done and all of that, and that they were signed. So, you know, it's like, I think you have to, you know, I don't think that was a very good move. Like, I think he blew their spot. You know, he had this little vendetta against Tony Khan because probably Tony Khan didn't want to give him a job, just like Eric Bischoff didn't want to give him a job, just like all these big mad wrestling types who are mad at AEW they're probably just angry because Tony didn't want to give him a job. And this was his way of getting some little revenge, some little petty revenge, and it ended up blowing up his boys' plans. Personally, I think, you know, you don't have to point the finger too far. He egged them on. They went after it. They weren't very smart about it. Let's be real. And Conan was absolutely not smart about it because he started practically bragging on his podcast that he was doing it. And again, you know, no matter how much you want to point fingers at Conan, the Lucha Bros decided to do this, right? The Lucha Bros just went in there and they decided to go the course. They're grown-ass men. They made these decisions, whether they were pushed towards it or not. That was up to them. And I was reading on Lucha Blog today that apparently this isn't the first time that contract issues have plagued them. They've had similar troubles with Lucha Underground and AAA. You know, they apparently always make decisions to make things very difficult. It's never really stopped them though. Like, it's never caused them any harm because they've always ended up being more successful, right? You know, from AEW, from AAA / Lucha Underground, and then they move on to AEW, and now they're going to move on to WWE. Because regardless of what's happening here, here's the thing, is that they're likely going to end up in WWE, right? That's essentially what's going to happen here. They're going to go to WWE. They're ultimately going to win. It's just going to take a little more time for them to do it. But they're still coming out on top. They are going to get what they want, which is fine. Don't get me wrong. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I have no issue with guys moving around promotions, right? This is all just like incredibly funny drama. And I like to think that Hunter's got a garage of masks for a year. I like to think that my position is measured, you know, where I'm able to see the pros and cons of both sides. I think ultimately, you know, if I'm going very, very objectively speaking, like I think in the purest, most rational way you can approach this, right? The most rational way. You're the owner, your talent signs the contract, they know what they're getting into. It's not your fault if they didn't read the fine print. You're in a talent war with another company that says they don't perceive you as competition, yet they often act in ways that prove the contrary. So you, as the owner in this circumstance, I think you lock down your talent for as long as you can. I think it is the best possible solution, because then otherwise, at the same time, it sends a horrible message to anyone sticking around backstage. Just a terrible message to anyone sticking around backstage. And the Lucha Bros are going to get what they want, ultimately. Next summer, less than a year, they'll be fine. And they'll debut whichever way will be, you know, in a grandiose way. And I promise, like, they're going to get over regardless. The Zero Miedo thing is going to... This Zero Miedo thing is the recipe to success in WWE. They're going to be fine. They're going to be absolutely fine. Can't even begin to tell you just how fine they're going to be.